I opened my eyes at the song as the song was ending, and everyone was surrounding me from the dance floor. And this girl I was dancing with said, "Are you okay?"
Welcome to Fulfillment Project. Today, I am joined by a special guest, Dr. Vic Strecher, a professor at the University of Michigan School of Public Health, a behavioral scientist, and one of the leading voices on the science of purpose. Vic has spent decades studying how purpose shapes not just our motivation, but our health, longevity, and resilience. His research shows that living with a clear sense of purpose isn't just inspiring, it's measurable, biological, and life altering. His work is deeply personal. After experiencing profound loss in his own life, Vic turned his research towards a question many of us wrestle with. What actually makes life worth living when everything gets stripped away? You can see why I wanted him on the Fulfillment Project podcast. He's the author of books like Life on Purpose and On Purpose. He's the creator of the Purposeful Framework and app and host of the Purpose Cast, where science meets lived experience. His work argues that purpose is not a motivational poster. It's a real force that shapes how we suffer, how we endure, how we choose, and how we live. So if you're like me and you've felt successful but not satisfied, busy but not anchored, or like you're doing all the right things but still missing something, I think this conversation with Vic is going to be right up your alley. Vic, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Andy. Very nice intro, and really appreciate the invitation to be on your show.
So my friend Walt gave me your book On Purpose here. I've never seen a book like it. I was on a plane reading it, and that is only relevant because I was crying. And I
Oh,
texted Walt and I said, "Am I going to cry this whole thing? I'm halfway through." And he said, "Probably." And it's
yeah,
so personal. I'm so grateful for your vulnerability in this book, Vic. And to have you on today is truly, really special to share. Well,
thanks.
first of all, just to meet you and for you to share your story with the group and what you've learned from both an academic and a personal standpoint. So I'm just going to launch into it. Where did this question of purpose first become unavoidable for you, Vic?
Wow, it's a great question, by the way. Thank you. And I have to say, it became unavoidable for me about 15, 16 years ago when my daughter, Julia, who was 19 years old, died very suddenly of a heart attack. And she was a heart transplant recipient. She's one of these early kids who ended up receiving a heart transplant. She caught a chickenpox virus out of the blue. It attacked her heart. It destroyed her heart, actually. And her only hope of living to, the age of 2 was to get a new heart. And that kind of rocked me. It rocked our family to the core, really, as you might guess. The most significant thing that's happened in my life was this situation with our younger daughter, Julia. And when that happened, even the decision to whether to list her for a new heart was something we discussed, because it turns out that 50% of children waiting for a new heart die before they get a heart. And then if
No
they do
way.
get a heart transplant, 50% die within the first 5 years. So if you do the statistical math, it'd be, zero point 0.5, 50% times 50%, which is 25%. So she had a 1 in 4 chance of living to be 6 years old. And so in deciding to list her, we also had to decide how to live our lives and live her life. And we decided that we would live her life in as big a way as possible. And that doesn't mean, there's this wonderful organization called Make-A-Wish, where
Yeah.
people who are really severely ill or dying, or both, are given something very special, special gift, maybe going to Disney World, maybe meeting Cameron Diaz, whatever. But we didn't want to do that every day for her, of course. We just wanted to live a bigger life for her. And then we started asking ourselves at the dinner table, what we call the gathering place in our family,
Mm.
what is a big life? What does a big life mean? And so that was kind of the foundation, Andy, of thinking about more purposeful living. It was really at that point saying, how do we live a big life for her? And then that kind of transformed us. Black and white kind of turned into technicolor in our lives. But a time when, and I'm just kind of, I hope this isn't too long winded, but I just wanted to use that as the basis because she got a new heart when she was 14 months old. She ended up needing a second one when she was 9, and she almost died at that time. But then she lived another 10 years and she was in nursing school at the University of Michigan. Um, we were on spring break. We took her down to the Caribbean with her older sister, Rachel, and um, we took their boyfriends too. And because they both had really neat boyfriends. And so we just all had this wonderful dinner on the beach the third night there and in the Caribbean. And she turned to us and said, as she was going to her room, and she said, I'm so happy that I could die now. And those were the last words we heard. And, sometimes people just say, I'm so happy I could die. And I guess she meant it. And she died very suddenly, very unexpectedly in the middle of the night of a heart attack. When that happened, it, um, it forced me into a confrontation with my own life. I started, of course, everyone grieves after they lose someone very close to them. That's a natural thing to do. I learned through my personal experience and through experts who helped me that grief is a very personal process, but also requires support. But, you can't judge somebody else's grief because people grieve differently.
Yeah.
My wife, who's an artist and a sculptor, was sculpting and she was gardening and doing things in Ann Arbor where we live. We also have a cabin up in northern Michigan, right on Lake Michigan. And I decided to go up there and spent the next month eating too much, drinking way too much alcohol, falling asleep in front of the TV by 8 o'clock and waking up, at 2 in the morning going, where am I? And realizing that this wasn't right for me. And this is a point
Mm.
in my life where I realized I was really going to die. I was really headed toward an early death if I didn't change myself. And I realized what I needed was a new purpose. I needed to repurpose my life. And I started thinking about my life in terms of different chapters of my life, different chapters of a story, in fact. And this was really a new chapter in a story. It's a dark chapter, but it's a chapter that I had a choice. I could either, die or I could live. And I did have a choice. But if I decided to live, I would have to really change many things.
Wow. So that gets to a refrain I think I want to come back to throughout the conversation because I don't think it's a simple question and answer. But if purpose isn't something we discover once, I think a lot of people have a misconception that you,
Right.
you find it and there it is,
Yeah.
But if it's not that,
Right.
if it's not something we find once, but actually something that's forged through loss, through struggle, through choice, you said there's a seasonality aspect to it, which I can certainly relate to and which seems real in your life. All that considered, what actually creates purpose in a human life?
Yeah, sure. So let me try to demystify this idea of purpose because it seems so highfalutin, doesn't it? It's
Yeah.
like, and some people view it as a quote calling. I'm Saul on the road to Damascus, and suddenly, boom, I'm Paul. I have a new purpose in my life, and that was a calling. And many people believe purpose is like that, and for some people it is, but it's more rare than you might think. I think purpose to me is a self-organizing life aim. By that, it's self-organizing, meaning I do it. myself. I have to do
Mm,
this internally. I don't let my parents write my resume for me. And if I do, for example, I'm a professor at Michigan, and when I teach my college freshmen, I say, take the resume your parents wrote for you and tear it up because now you are an official human being. You're an adult. And now you need to write your own resume, and it's not going to come right away. It's going to come over time, but it's going to be your resume. So this is self organizing. And by organizing, what it means is when I have a purpose, my goals become better organized. I I know where to go. I like to use the metaphor of a tree. Teachers, I guess, love trees as metaphors, but if on a branch of a tree, if those are our behaviors, if I go down one branch, like let's say I get home at the end of the day and I'm really tired and I go, wow, I need an old fashioned, I need a cocktail or
yeah.
something. But I also have two kids who are going, Daddy, could you play with me? And, if I have a strong purpose, I know which branch to go to. And if I go down the cocktail branch, I'm probably going to have another cocktail. And then I'm probably going to be too tired or not lucid enough to really engage with quality time with my children. If I have that purpose of engaging with my kids, I know which branch to go down. But it goes all the way back to the root system of my tree, which is my core values and my purpose. So having a purpose organizes my goals in my life, and it helps direct and channel where I'm going to go, how I'm going to act, how I'm going to respond to stress, because we know people with strong purpose actually respond to stress very differently than people with a weak purpose. People with
Hmm.
a strong purpose are more resilient. They see a big picture. When times are weird, like they are now, of course, they're weird
Yeah.
times. We're living through weird times, weird weather, weird politics, weird all sorts of stuff. So, regardless of your politics, it we're probably under more anxiety, more stress than we have been before. People who have strong purpose see a big picture. They often can imagine a silver lining coming out of stress and strain. Uh, it's something they know how to cope with this. They know how to manage their own weather. They know how to change their own weather. If they get upset, if they're cut off by a car on the highway, they know how to take a big breath and go, that's not the biggest problem I'm going to face today, probably.
Mm. Hey, everyone. Quick 10-second ask from you. If you're digging the show and you're watching on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up and comment your favorite part. If you're listening on Spotify, please give this show a 5-star rating. On iTunes, please leave a quick review. If you're listening on Substack, please subscribe and join the comments. You may want to subscribe in a few different places. For example, YouTube, you get all of our short content, 60-second to 90-second clips, our segments where we segment out 1 to 6 minute different segments of each episode. And then if you subscribe on the Substack, I summarize the episode in a newsletter. You can read it in a couple minutes. And then a couple days after the episode, I put out a self-reflection guide to help you personalize the content to your life. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Please share it with a friend. So, Vic, what is your purpose today? And has it changed?
Yeah, my purpose changes usually when I need a Hallmark card. So, if I graduate from college,
It's a
if I get
great way to say it.
married, if I get sick, you need a Hallmark card usually. If I have
Yep.
kids, if I get a new job, if I lose a job, if I lose a loved one, if I lose a marriage, if I retire, all those things are all those points in your life might be points, Hallmark card points, where you might want to think about repurposing your life almost as a new chapter in your life. So I like to view my life as a book with different chapters. I like to think about the end of my life being the New York Times book review of my book. So, like, what would that book reviewer say about
Whoa.
my book? Did this book
Whoa.
move me?
Yeah.
Um, did it inspire me? I'm in a school of public health and a school of medicine. One of the probably the most famous researcher in our school of public health at the University of Michigan was Jonas Salk, who developed the polio vaccine. And he said later in his life that we should be good ancestors. And I thought, that's such a great way to think about this book and the review of your the book review of your life, essentially. What do you want people to say at your memorial service? What would you want on your headstone? When I tell my students about this, I teach a course on purpose. They at first go, "Ew, no, dying, we hate it." And but then I go, "No, write your what do you want on your headstone? What do you want people to say at your memorial service? Or write your own book review of the book of your life." And at the end of it, they go, "Wow, this this is really important, and I didn't realize it." Uh, so you do need to change over time. Now, getting back to your question about my purpose, um, in a chapter of my life where I feel like it's important to help other people find purpose and direction. I found through my own research that, and through other people's research and working with amazing colleagues from neuroscientists to epigenetic researchers, we can get into that if you want, to behavioral scientists, to physicians and clinicians, that people with a strong purpose simply flourish. They are more likely to be happy. Um, and I thought, we need this now. We're increasingly becoming depressed and increasingly letting anxiety hijack our lives. And I'm tired of it. I think the world needs greater purpose and direction, orientation. So, in this more specific sense, my purpose is to help other people find purpose. I guess euphemistically, I like to think about getting people out onto the dance floor of life.
Mm. If people aren't on the dance floor of life, what do you think most people are doing?
They're wallflowers. So, I remember in you see, I'm much older than you, but when I was in 8th grade, ninth grade, we had these things called sock hops at the gym in junior high and high school, and they would play some music or have a little band, and people would always stand on the side of the gym walls, kind of waiting for somebody to ask them to dance. And, it's kind of like if you just passed a note saying Mary wants to dance with you. And,
Mm-hmm.
somebody passed another note, hey, Jimmy wants to dance with you, they'd be more likely to dance, right? But instead, there's no notes like that usually. So maybe two people want to dance with one another, but they don't. So they're wallflowers. And even the word wallflower is kind of neat. It's like you're a flower, you're beautiful, but you're on the wall, which is how most people seem to treat their lives. It's like, well, I don't want to go out there. No, because once I go out there, then everyone's going to watch my dance. And what if my dance stinks? Everyone will laugh at me. And there's actually one time in high school where I can't remember, probably a sophomore in high school. And there's a song I really loved. And I was a wallflower and I was very shy. But this song that I loved and really wanted to dance to came out. And so I gathered the courage to ask this girl to dance. And I was so into this dance, like I literally was closing my eyes and I was like turning around like this
Yeah,
crazy
just letting
person,
it
like
rip, baby.
twisting and turning.
Yeah.
I was totally into it. Yeah. And I was loving my dance, loving it. And then I opened my eyes at the song as the song was ending, and everyone was surrounding me from the dance floor. And this girl I was dancing with said, "Are you okay?" It's like she thought I was having a seizure. And and I thought I was embarrassed for decades, Andy. I mean, really, I was embarrassed for decades. Whenever I
Yeah.
went back to that
Moment.
remembrance, I went, "Oh my god." And now I think about it with great pride because that's how I want to live my life. And I hope other people kind of are able to, in a way, dance their own dance and not really care about what other people think, because the more other people are you the more you're worried, the worse you are as a dancer. You're a better dancer when you're truly dancing freely and you're enjoying and loving and totally grooving on the music. And when you do that, you're loving life. And that to me is a purpose.
Whoa. Before the tragic events with Julia, were you as interested in purpose? Has this always been a life mission that got
No,
incorporated after this,
it
or
it
was there a
wasn't.
life shift for you?
It was a huge life shift. So first when she got sick, when she was 1 year old, and I was an assistant professor, just just doing fine, actually. I was writing grants, I was writing journal articles, I was teaching, I was doing all the things to get tenure. And then I'm going, great, then I'll golf more and, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, it's just like, what a good gig this is. And I'm pretty good at it. And when she got sick, I realized, well, she taught me about the finiteness of life and the importance of it. Sounds so trite, Andy, when I even say it, but living each day as if that might be your last. But when you do that, when you start living as if you're not going to live forever, you start living differently. Marcus Aurelius talked about this, 2,000 years ago. He said, don't live your life as if you're going to live 10,000 years. While you're alive, do good things. And that to me, what we call in psychology, mortality salience, you need to be thinking about this. Steve Jobs was giving the commencement address at Stanford University. He was dying when he was doing that, and he knew it. And he said, you know what? Death is the single greatest invention of life. It's life's change agent. And
Mm,
and imagine those Stanford people, the leaders, amazing, brilliant people, and they're
yeah.
all going, "Wow, I can't wait to become a private equity specialist or invent this new, gizmo or new company, start it up."
Feeling
Whatever.
totally
They're all
invincible. Yep.
invincible. And then he's going, death is life's change agent. It's the single best invention of life. What is he talking about? But that's a person who thought a lot about death. And in thinking about that, what we never like to think about or go to movies and watch the hero actually die. In fact, usually they somehow miraculously come back, because we can't stand to buy a ticket to watch a movie that we know the hero is going to die. But we do end up dying. And so, how do we live this life a little more seriously as if this isn't just a practice life? That's what Julia did for me. It changed me. Before then, I wasn't taking my life seriously, or with any sort of urgency to it. And as a result, I was kind of sleepwalking through life as opposed to, and life was black and white, and now it is technicolor. And it has been since I started living that way.
Wow. In college, I met a group of guys that introduced me to the phrase frater memento mori, brother, remember thy death. And
Yeah, right. Yeah.
one night we dug our own graves symbolically. Like,
Really? Really?
yes, and
Oh
it
my gosh.
really moved me because up until that point in my life, I was just blowing with the breeze, essentially chasing whatever pleasure was closest at
Sure.
hand.
Right. Yeah.
And that changed my whole paradigm and uh, influences me 18 years later today. I think about that all the time.
Yeah.
Talking to your freshman students about writing their epitaph and thinking about the end. I've never heard
Yeah.
someone say it like you. Like I've heard the chapter of your book. There's different seasons of life, different chapters of the book. But at the end, what do you want the New York Times summary to say? It's people avoid it like they avoid trust planning and estate planning because they think if you do it, you'll die. And it's actually the opposite. Once you do that, you're taken care of and now you can live, baby.
Now you live. Thank you, Andy. You've nailed it. That's exactly the case.
What do most people, Vic, get wrong about purpose?
Um, One of the things they get wrong is that it's immutable, that it doesn't change. So somehow I need to think about this and stick with it for the rest of my life. Purposes change over time, almost, like I said, when you need a Hallmark card, view it
Yeah.
almost as the rings on a tree. I'll go back to the tree metaphor and think about doing this as early as possible. So, or with your children. Imagine if you were at the dinner table with your kids and you said at this gathering place, what is our purpose as a family? We have a unit that's called a family. Why do we have that unit? Are we just four people who are disparate and we run off on our own lives? You go to kindergarten, go to third grade, I'll go to work, you go to that work, blah, blah, blah. We'll meet again, we'll eat in front of the TV or do whatever. Well, that's not a family to me. A family is a unit of analysis. A family is a unit of purpose, potentially. So if you said, as a family, do we have a purpose? And then somebody says, maybe to help other people, says your 8-year-old. You go, wow, that's pretty neat, Doodly. What do you think, Little Snoodly? And Little Snoodly says, yeah, I saw a person sitting on the street and I felt bad because he looked so poor. Well, what can we do? Maybe we can feed people who are homeless uh, maybe once a month. How about if we do that? Okay, we'll go out and do that. That's our purpose, to help our community by feeding the homeless. Whatever that is, you can decide. It's your family. But imagine a kid who grows up like that, where they view service and doing something for strangers, which is a really big thing. I mean,
Mhm.
the Good Samaritan, it is
Oh, yeah.
you you stop at the stranger who has been beaten up and you put him on your donkey and you move, you ride the donkey over to a hotel and you say, here's some money to take care of this guy. Give him some clothes too, by the way, and I'll see you. That's pretty amazing. So imagine kids who are raised with that type of ethos. It means the core of their tree is incredibly strong. And then every new ring on the tree is going to have a tendency, a set of core values, you might say, that lends itself to purposes that will make that kid happier and more fulfilled and more flourishing.
So I'm visualizing it, and the trunk is almost the idea of having a purpose in itself, having an inclination to have a purpose, and then the different rings in the trunk are the specific purposes throughout your life as they
Which then lend
change.
themselves to these branches, which is how do I behave and how do I feel?
Uh,
What are my emotions? Can I manage my emotions? Now, we know from a neuroscience perspective that this is all going on in different regions of the brain. We literally put people in MRI, magnetic resonance imaging. We have them think about their purposeful core values or things like their daily routine, as a control condition. And we look at different parts of the brain that get more oxygenated blood flow. So they kind of light up. You've seen these images of
yeah.
brains and some parts are lighting up. We can look at different regions that light up if we scare a person or if we have a person think about their purpose. And we find that when we ask people to think more about their purpose, it's a very modern part of our brain, a very human part called the ventral medial prefrontal cortex. It gets much more blood flow right behind our eyebrows, about half an inch in. And we have 3 times more of this space than, chimpanzees, monkeys, much more than any other animal. And when that gets more active, it actually tends to govern down activation in our amygdala, which is our fear center, and that's a very ancient part of the brain.
Hmm.
Dinosaurs had it. We often call it the reptile brain, but that's the part of the brain that gets really upset fast or wants to lash out or gets very scared and frightened and can hijack our brain. And when this part of the brain, this prefrontal cortex, is very active when we're thinking about purpose, we're far less susceptible to getting scared over time. Everyone gets scared and should get scared, you know, in the immediate sense. If somebody's running at you with a knife or you get cut off by a car or whatever, and, that's important to get scared. At the same time, you want to then say, what do I do about it? Like right away, rather than just, being hijacked by the fear.
Well, and in your wallflower example and your middle school example of dancing
Yeah.
like a beast on the dance floor, which by the way, you know, everyone was wishing they were you. But if
Yeah.
that dance is your purpose, to use the analogy,
Yeah.
it seems like the fear in your mind of worrying about other people is lessened, reduced, or goes away. So you can actually dance, your strong dance, and there's less fear, which is something I just learned with you saying that. Is that fair to say?
Totally fair to say, 100%. And so we're just talking about some of the reasons why having a purpose is really, really good for you.
Well, and why, if you don't have a purpose and you're just responding to your boss and you're chasing pleasures and monetary rewards or other rewards, you get scared. I always attributed that to losing what you wanted. And maybe
Yeah,
that's a piece of it.
very much. You mentioned money, and, people certainly need money to live. They need money to be satisfied, to achieve certain goals in their life. So I don't want to discount money. At the same time, I work a lot with people who are very, very well off, billionaires and people. I've been to the Rockefeller estate, meeting with the Rockefeller family in the past, and worked with other people who just have very high net worth. And not everybody is very happy. You'd think, oh, poor billionaire, why should I care about you? And maybe we shouldn't, but you know, it's it always amazes me that all the money in the world does not seem to make a person happy. In fact, very often their kids don't talk to them and their wife hates them. And, there's just, they encounter all sorts of things. The other thing about having a lot of money is they may go out and have an amazing dinner, and then they'll have another amazing dinner the next night, then another amazing dinner. And people start then whining about, oh, that asparagus wasn't done all that well. Oh, no, the
Yeah.
chef must be off tonight. Things like that. You're going, what? You are eating amazing food.
Yeah.
Um, so
That
it's
Chateauneuf de Pop wasn't chilled to the perfect
not
temperature.
quite right. Yeah, that golf
Yeah.
course we just played, I've you could go on and on about things that give us what we would call hedonic pleasure. Aristotle called it hedonic pleasure. And he said, that's fine. It's good to seek pleasure, that no problem. He said, I agree with Epicurus about that. On the other hand, if that's all we are, then we are like grazing animals, he called it in his Nicomachean Ethics book. He said, what's more important is to be in touch with this inner true self that we have, what he called the daemon. The daemon is almost like this angel that went between and lived inside of Greeks, and would communicate with the Greek gods about how to actually act, how to live, about your virtues, what should you present to other people, and that inner daemon, he called it eudaimonia, when you're really in touch with this inner daemon. And he said, that's true happiness. When you're in touch with this true self, this godlike self, this transcending self that's not just even thinking about yourself anymore, but thinking about others, thinking about causes bigger than yourself,
Mm.
um, then you become happier. And it takes some people a whole lifetime to figure that out.
And some people seem to never figure it out, sadly enough. Does everyone discover it at some point? Do you think everyone
No,
does? Maybe too late, or do you think some people?
it's funny. We've done some research looking at people in hospice who are dying, and so often you have people in hospice say, "I never acted this way in my life, but now I understand what real happiness is, which is, you know, not things. It's not the things that make me happy. It's my family, it's my friends, it's my community, it's love, it's compassion, it's kindness." Even in this hospice, when I'm kind to another person who's dying, I get so much more satisfaction than I ever did in my life from material objects or things. So you do see it very often toward the end of your life. I've always felt hospice is a neat time for maybe bringing the family together with the dying person and asking the dying person, are there lessons you've learned in your life that you might be able to teach these generations who are right now listening to you? And sometimes that can't happen, but sometimes it can happen.
Wow. If people don't have access to someone they know personally in hospice, Vic, Is this research published somewhere where you can get these quotations? I feel like it's very powerful hearing from
Yeah,
someone who is suffering,
yeah.
and especially someone on their deathbed, near their
Yeah,
deathbed.
I wrote about this in my book Life on Purpose. That I did a lot of research for both my graphic novel On Purpose and for the Life on Purpose book. But there was some new research that had come out before I was writing the book Life on Purpose, and I put some of these quotes in there.
That's my next one. I obviously have On Purpose, which is a graphic novel that, just a quick sidebar from the conversation. People, you've never seen anything like this. You never will again. It is it is Batman meets Plato meets Epicurus meets Solzhenitsyn. It's a comic book that is so deeply moving, and the way you wind your personal story in with, as you're learning about purpose
Thanks.
and the truths and other researchers, you're narrating what you're learning, but there's so much profoundness, if that's a word.
Andy,
Uh,
there's a kind of a funny story related to that. When you mentioned Batman,
yeah.
I was in New York City to give a talk, and it was just months after Julia had died. So I was really struggling. But I was also trying to figure out, like, wow, I'd gone through this whole thing. I'd had this experience out in a kayak 2 miles out into Lake Michigan. It was very profound. That really changed me a lot and got me out of my grief. And so I had to somehow tell this story about how I've kind of repurposed my life. And one of my purposes is to teach every one of my students as if they're Julia. So that's a big component of
Mm,
my purpose now. And so I was thinking about it. I thought, well, I can't make a movie. I don't have enough money to make a movie. I could write a poem, but I'm not a poet. I could maybe, I didn't know what to do. And then I looked, and I'm not really a writer, popular writer, but I wanted to somehow convey this message about purpose to the, general public. And I was walking down Madison Avenue in New York, and I looked up and I saw a sign that said DC Comics. And it was like the comic books. It's where they made Mad Magazine, where all sorts of things.
yep.
So I took out my phone and I cold called. I literally was staring up at DC Comics, this huge building, 20-story building or whatever is big. And they said DC Comics. And I said, yeah, can I talk to the creative director? They said, oh, David. I said, yeah, David, of course. And I never
You're a natural.
cold call. No, but anyway, so this guy comes on, this is David, and I said, David, here's the thing. Here's the story that I have. And I conveyed the story. And I said, I don't know if it's possible to like find comic book illustrators. I know nothing about it. I know nothing about it. And he said, do you like wine? And I said, well, do fish swim? And he said, look,
Yeah.
meet me on the Batman floor at 5 o'clock. I said, the Batman floor? And he said, yeah, we own Batman, the comics, and
No
I'm in
way.
charge of
Stop it.
syndicating the Batman comics into the Batman movies. That's what my job is. And I said, so you like wine? He said, I do. And there's a wine bar just, a few blocks. Meet me on the Batman floor and we'll share a bottle of wine. So anyway, he introduces me to comic illustrators on the Batman floor. Of course, they have the Batmobile from the first movie right there. It's unbelievable. Go to the second floor of DC Comics. There it is. And so anyway, I bought him this nice bottle of wine. It was not cheap. I bought like $100 bottle of wine, but I thought, imagine the consulting fee of a person like
Oh,
this.
I,
Nothing.
yeah.
It's a 50th of the price. So anyway, we share this bottle of wine, and he starts talking and says, you're going to need 3 different illustrators for this because you have like you in a classroom idea. You have you in your
Mm-hmm.
dreams, and that going back to this ephemeral touch with Julia, you've got this dark side where you're really going very deep down a rabbit hole and it's very black, very dark. And he said, you're going to need 3 artists unless you get this one guy. He's Cajun and he's kind of a difficult person to reach. His name is Cody Chamberlain. He's often at Comic-Con. He's kind of a hero there. And so it turns out he lived in Lafayette, Louisiana. I cold called him, and it took like 3 or 4 weeks to reach him. I kept calling, and finally I get this call and goes, "This is Cody." And I go, "Cody, I've been trying to reach you." He said, "Yeah, tell me, what's the idea?" And I pitched this idea, and he goes, "Really? Can you come to Lafayette?" I said, "When?" "I don't know, the weekend." It was Thursday. I said, "Can you come on the
What?
week on Saturday?" I said,
Stop.
"Sure." Fly down to Lafayette, Louisiana, picks me up in this giant, like Olds 88, one of these big old, he's playing Zydeco music. He is this crazy Cajun dude. Hop in the car. He goes, "Do you like boudin sausage?" I said, "Do fish swim?" And I'd never had boudin sausage. I really did
Yeah,
not
I have no
like it.
idea what
But
it is.
anyway, so he's just drawing like crazy. We end up doing this book together. So it was just like this, one thing locked in, then another thing locked in, then another. I could go on, but yeah, when you mentioned Batman, I just remember like I'm that was a really interesting journey. Took 3 years then to write it.
Well, to me, the cold call is successful because you have a message that resonates. Your story is so compelling and you're chasing down, trying to connect with something everyone wants. Everyone wants to live with purpose. Most people know they're not living with it. You see people, you can tell someone that does, even if you don't know them, they just carry themselves. They have a swagger, a spark in their eye that you want.
Well,
And
think about your own life, Andy. You're used to cold calling, I'm sure, in your job, but people who develop podcasts, I think a podcast is a cold call because you don't have an audience right away. You are cold calling an audience from scratch. And so the people who are listening to this podcast, you have somehow, magnetized to come toward you because you have presented, and in your profession that you don't motivate people, that you appeal to people's motives and
mm,
understanding what they want and their motives, and reaching them according to that, then suddenly that magnetizes you.
wow, I'd never heard it said like that, Vic, but it makes perfect sense. It makes perfect sense. It is hard to speak out into thin air for a while until people, but the topic of fulfillment, the whole reason I started this is because it seems like everyone wants it and no one's quite sure how to do it. And you synthesized it in a way I've never heard before, 50 episodes in now. People are wallflowers. People are scared, and it's real because I've experienced that, and probably everyone listening has that same experience where you're on the wall, and man, you
Yeah.
don't want to step out. You don't want to get made fun of.
And you're dancing your dance right now, not knowing what other people think. Your eyes are closed because you can't see your audience. So you don't
Hmm.
know. Maybe the audience is going, what are these idiots talking about? And it could well be. But if we cared about that so much, we wouldn't have a conversation like this. And you know it.
100%. And so, one thing I try to be careful of, Vic, is not to tell people what to do, but telling people how to do. You read so many books and you're so captivated.
Yeah.
What should you do with your life? And I'm like, yeah, that is what I should do. And then you get done, you're like, oh crap. Now what do I do? And so how do people find a purpose? People are listening today and they
Yeah.
know there's a purpose shaped hole in their heart. What's the
Sure.
first I you've compelled me and the listener enough with all the brain, all the research, the
Sure.
MRIs, so
Yeah.
we know there's
People
real
live
value in it.
longer, they're less likely to develop Alzheimer's disease, they're half as likely to become depressed. There's all sorts of amazing things. That's why I'm in public health. Like, why would I be focusing on this thing called purpose? It's because people actually take better care of themselves. So my purpose is to teach my students as if they're my own daughter. So I walk to work. I'll be teaching like 60 pre-med students tonight at 7:30 in a pre-med club at Michigan. And my wife said, "Well, you can have the parking sticker for U of M." I said, "No, I'm walking." So I walk. I try to eat well. I try to sleep well, but I don't do it for me. I do it because I need energy for a purpose. And so
Mm,
people take better care of themselves. In terms of how to find purpose, I'm going to give you two layers of thinking about this. So one will be a really super simple layer, and let's start with that. And the other is how
Yeah.
to become really purposeful. So the layer that starts, I like to recommend that people start thinking about what matters most in their lives. So if you literally write those things down on a sheet of paper, what matters most? And you might say, well, maybe my kids or my spouse or my dog or my plant or my cat or my political affiliation or whatever it is. Write down maybe five of those or 10 of those things that matter. Then cut it down to five. Then cut it down to two or three. If you have a hard time doing that, you might even look at the wallpaper of your smartphone. When you open your smartphone, like what's there? That what because you stare at that literally 60 to 100 times a day, depending on your
Yeah.
age. So you're affirming something that very often matters to you. It might be a saying or quote or you skiing or a beautiful place, whatever it is. What is that? Could be your granddaughter. Whatever those things are, those things may spark this idea, wow, could I wrap a purpose around that? I'm here to be a father. And in being a father now, um, could I literally write a statement about that? I am here on this planet for this brief period of time to be this and to be that. You might think about writing that. Is that making sense so far?
That makes perfect sense. Very clear application. And anyone can do it right now.
Yeah, you might think about causes. Who relies on you? Um, I think that's important as well. I just wrote a little op-ed and I sent it to the British Medical Journal. I hope they publish it. But it's takes place back in when Sherlock Holmes and Watson were talking, and I played with it because I was listening to an old Sherlock Holmes story the night before. But the idea would be this woman comes out and she has been seeing Dr. Watson, who is treating her for type 2 diabetes and putting her on, an GLP-1, and like Ozempic, and
Yeah.
putting her on all sorts of other drugs. And she's now costing $40,000 a year and she's obese and blah, blah, blah. Just watches TV. And Sherlock Holmes says, what was the name of her cat? And Watson says, "Cat? What do you mean? She doesn't have a cat." Of course she had a cat. She had cat hairs embedded in her coat. As she was walking out, I noticed that. But they weren't on the surface. They were embedded. So it's an older cat and they are gray hairs. So it's an older cat and the cat obviously had died or there would have been hairs on the outside. So I could just tell, and the way she walked, she was winding around as if a cat was winding around, and et cetera. So I write this thing. I say, how much would it cost to just recommend that she gets a new cat? Because
Mm.
it's, in other words, finding something that she cares about, that she can create a purpose around, means that when she hears, some glass tipping over at 2 a.m. in the morning, she has to get up. Well, she has a purpose to take care of this cat and to keep the house straight, to wake up in the morning to feed the cat, blah, blah, blah. So it doesn't matter what it is that relies on you. It matters that you have something that relies. It could be a cause that relies on you. So think about those things. So that's the short answer. The bigger answer is, in terms of a more systematic approach to becoming purposeful. If you want to learn more about this, I have written these two books on purpose and life on purpose. I also have built over the last 10 years an app, a phone app called Purposeful. And it's easy to look up, but Purposeful actually helps you become more intentional every single day. It helps you, uses a lot of artificial intelligence, and like we have an AI coach that helps you find your purpose and refine your purpose. So every day it helps you become more purposeful, thinking about what your day is going to be like. Like maybe I'll have a podcast today. Maybe I'll have a talk tonight. So I need to be inspiring. Maybe I need to be calm because I'll be with the grandkids pretty soon, and et cetera. So whatever those things I need to be, it helps me be more purposeful and be who I really want to be and not out of control.
So no matter what the day brings, what I just heard you say, you can find purpose.
Well, you and I woke up. You live in Toledo. I live in Ann Arbor. We woke up with frigid weather, and we're going, wait a second. This isn't fair. It's been 70 recently. This is not
Yep.
good. Well, knowing that then and walking outside to walk our dog or walk our kids to school or whatever, we know we need to wear a coat. So we look at the weather first thing in the morning to see what's the weather going to be like. What if you also thought about what do I need to be? Who do I need to be today? Because very often we need to be different kinds of people. I need to be thoughtful. I need to be kind. I need to be a good listener. I need to be inspiring, whatever. And so Purposeful, this app, we spent a lot of time building this. It's a really cool way to think about how I'm going to be purposeful every day. You don't have to use it every day, but it starts building habits out for you that first understand who you are. And then next step, how you become who you are more often.
No wonder you're a master teacher. The whole analogy of you look at the weather to see how you're going to dress, you look at the day to see how you're going to find purpose.
Yeah,
Of course, you have to put on your purpose coat every day.
you
And
got it.
so, what's the best argument against purpose? Have you ever heard any good
Yeah, sure.
arguments?
Yeah, it's funny. There's some people who get what I call purpose anxiety now. I don't have a purpose. Oh my God, what do I do? And everybody else now is finding their purpose. Oh crap. And people waiting for it, like for some deity to come down and, in a bolt of lightning, you are now this. That may not happen. You have to actively work toward this. Often physicians that I speak with, especially women, I was giving a talk in Maui a few years ago to the OB-GYN, National Obstetrics and Gynecology Organization, all these 500 doctors, probably 400 are women. And I ran a workshop after the keynote address about finding purpose. And all these people came in and almost all were women. And they said,
Hmm.
we're so used to having to overachieve compared to our male counterparts. Now, suddenly, there's one more thing I need to overachieve, and I'm really nervous. I don't have a purpose. And I'd say, really? You're like a physician, like you're doing, the most amazing work. And they go, no, not purposeful the way you're talking about. We need to have more purpose. So, yeah, you can probably develop purpose anxiety. Um, but I'll tell you that one thing I find that's somebody recently asked me, a student, what's it like to have a purpose? And I said, it's very
Whoa.
much like jumping in I had to think about it because I'd never thought about the feeling it's like. I said, it's kind of like jumping in a river where the current is moving in a certain direction and you just feel like you're going with that flow and you really like that direction that you're taking. And then you may see an offshoot, a stream going off that river and go, I want to try that stream. And that is still going with the same current. And you're no longer fighting all the time, this current, and you're able to just go with the flow. But at the same time, you can pop around and experiment and try new things that are still part of that flow. I think that's a good analogy, at least for me, because I've been able to try all sorts of new things, write a graphic novel, a comic book,
Yeah.
um, you know, develop a new app, lots and lots of things that I've been able to explore and have fun with. And it's made my life so much richer as a result of having this strong purpose that I have in my life.
Well, and you just synthesized something I've been trying to put on words on the podcast over the last couple months, and the analogy of floating down a river and there's different channels. And what I've been trying to get at, Vic, I want your analysis on this, is people see certain outcomes they want and they try
Uh-huh.
and copy and paste someone who's been successful achieving that outcome into their life. They
Yeah,
decide to go to
sure,
law school, to med school because
sure.
they want
Yeah,
money or a house or a
yeah.
membership or whatever, prestige.
Uh-huh.
And you see someone really happy in that job. And that's
Uh-huh.
because that's their flow. That is their cause, their calling, their purpose.
Yeah,
And if that's not yours, you're going to be swimming upstream, to use your analogy, which I think is really good. So you're going again where they're
yeah.
going with the flow and everything in their life is pushing them more in that direction.
Yeah.
You have to fight everything in life towards that direction.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you, Andy. It's it's kind of a secret that I try to inform my students about too. A lot of my students want what I'd call escalator jobs. Like you hop on this escalator and you're up there and you're a doctor now. Then I suppose I'll be happy. Well, maybe they won't be. Maybe that escalator job, which they work really hard to get into medical school, for example, and then they become a doc. I know a lot of doctors who aren't that happy. I know a lot of lawyers and
Yeah.
other people who make plenty of money and have that kind of prestige. They're not very happy. There are other kinds of jobs that feel like more of a struggle for a while, almost like a shoots and ladders game or something. They have to hop over here. They may fail and go down, then they go back up, and then they find this and find that. They have to learn to be more opportunistic, more open. Um, but very often, those people, as long as you're finding that that fits with a purpose and direction that you have that you can be passionate about, and passion isn't the same as purpose, but if you have a strong purpose and direction in your life and you're following this, very often these good things happen. You end up with a job or a lifestyle that's far superior to an escalator job. Um, so I hope that makes sense to people.
Yeah, well, and to take it a step further, I want your analysis on this, and it ties right into it, is instead of focusing on the outcome, which many people do, you focus on floating down that river, the actual
Yeah.
day-to-day process of life, just daily life. If you enter in and can find purpose and fulfillment in the day-to-day, the monotony of whatever you're doing, you've done, who cares where you end up, to be honest? And that's why most people, I think, following that road end up more successful than people solely focused on outcome.
If I weren't a professor, another job I would love to do is be a greeter at Walmart. I would love to be that person right up front in Walmart where people walk in and they're tired or they're cranky or, whatever. And they're just going, oh, I'm going in here. And I'd love to pick up their day.
Mm.
I'd love to just take it on to the worst, the toughest ones. I'd love to, like, that's a challenge. Oh, that's a challenge. And I think that would just be, maybe it wears you out. I don't know. I've never been a greeter, but I've thought actually about taking a little sabbatical to be a greeter at Walmart. I think it'd be awesome. But anyone can be a greeter at Walmart if they're doing almost any job, whether you're, I don't know. It's just like, do you care about your job? Do you have passion and purpose in what you're doing? Do you treat it as something that has this bigger purpose to it? Those are all things that are, I think, important to life. We spend most
Yeah.
of our waking hours working. We should make sure our work has purpose.
And why wait? Why wait till retirement, until your bank account says this much, until you live in this house to start living? Why not get on the dance floor today?
Well, there you go, Andy.
Vic, I always say this, and I heard you say it, and I've got a great rebuttal I want to challenge you on. The research, if you have over $60,000, your happiness doesn't really change.
Sure.
Maybe that's been updated a little bit. Rich
Yeah.
people aren't as happy. You look at all the broken families, the unsatisfaction, the uh,
Yeah.
habitual use of drugs and anxiety and depression, suicide, all that. Okay, well, what do you say to someone that doesn't have enough money, that feels like they don't have enough money? How did they
Yeah.
find purpose when there's the anxiety of making ends meet, of paying bills, of putting a roof over their head, getting their kids what they need? What do you say
It's
to
a
people that don't have enough?
it's a great question. And I would say, and I think it would be terribly insensitive of me to just go, anyone who has a purpose is going to be happy. Um, it does take a certain amount of security um, to to feel like you can have agency, that you have control in your life, to have control to be able to find purpose and direction in your life. It's very important to do that. At the same time, one of my good friends is named James Aranatwe, and James was born in Uganda, and he was an AIDS orphan. He grew up um, with his grandmother, and when he was 5, his grandmother decided to take him to. He grew up in a rural area as an orphan. Took him to Kampala, the capital of Uganda, and brought him to the palace of the prime minister, and then went to the gate. This is a true story. And his grandmother said, "My grandson needs an education, and I want him to get an education in Kampala." And the guard said, "Who are you?"
Yeah.
And she said, "Well, I'd like to speak to the prime minister." "Well, you can't do that." And she said, "Well, I'll just wait for him." "Well, you'll wait a long time." Turns out she sat and they slept there by the palace for a couple of weeks. Finally,
What?
the prime minister's wife came out and said, "I heard you'd been out here for a long time. I'll speak to the son, but I'm not going to speak to you," or to the grandson. And so James went in when he was 5 and met with the prime minister's wife, said, "What do you want?" And James said, "I'd like an education." Said, "Okay, you're going to get one." And as a result, James created Teach for Uganda. And that's how I got to know him, because I've done AIDS work in Africa and other reasons. But anyway, so James is an unbelievable person. And I asked them this very question you did. I said, "Is purpose just for people who have everything else? Is it kind of the top of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Once you have
Yeah.
everything, then you go, how about my purpose?" And he just laughed. He said, "You Westerners think that, but we realize that people who are poor need purpose because purpose gives people hope. You have to have hope for the future. And in order to have hope, you need purpose. You also need agency. You need the ability to enact that hope, or
Yeah.
that purpose, that vision in your life. But without that vision and purpose, it doesn't matter how much agency you have. You need vision and purpose. So he was arguing it's essential for all human beings. If you go back to Viktor Frankl, who went through 3 concentration camps, he was seeing everybody around him die, starved to death, or just murdered outright. He
Yeah.
was finding that those people who had a transcending purpose and could maintain a purpose in their life were more likely to survive the camps. And
Hmm.
later on, they used their experiences to grow. Soldiers in the Gulf War who come back and can learn and find purpose from their experiences in the Gulf War end up developing what we call post traumatic growth, not post traumatic stress.
Whoa.
So,
Never
yeah, I
heard of that.
mean, and I've worked with those groups as well. So, I would just say, yes, it's important to have money, it's important to be secure. But at the same time, purpose is essential, probably in all walks of life.
I don't know a better place to leave it. Vic, what did I not touch on that is resounding because of my
I,
ignorance? And what do you got to say before we roll out of here?
Andy, you ask great questions, and I just want to express my gratitude, my appreciation to you for having a podcast like this that explores this idea of fulfillment. What does that mean when I, am in my 90s or 80s or 70s or whatever? What am I going to feel? How am I going to feel? Have I lived a life that has
Mm.
been worth living? When I have 200 years from now, and I'm just, under a headstone, and people come up to my headstone, will they say, "That was an amazing person. That was an ancestor who we all owe some debt to." Or maybe they don't do that, but maybe a person or two can look back and say and reflect back and go, "That was an amazing person that did a lot of heavy lifting in the lineage of our family
Yes.
or the lineage of our community." I think our world is so focused increasingly on influencers and social media. It's almost like at the bottom of the tree, under this root system of our lives, is this reservoir. And it used to be filled with family and community and maybe our religions, at least a philosophy of life. Now it's invaded by toxins. I would say influencers who
Whoa.
are trying to sell you stuff that they don't even buy themselves, or social influences, social media telling you you're not having as good a life as other people are.
Yep.
I would just say that maybe rather than worrying about what Kim Kardashian is doing, maybe worry about what your neighbor is doing, who is maybe 80 years old and can't get out of the house, and maybe just trying to express some kindness, some gratitude, maybe even to strangers, maybe smile at a person for a second. I know that sounds all trite and trivial. Try it. Just try it and see what happens in your life.
I'm going to link your books in the show notes so people can easily get to those.
Thanks. Thanks.
Vic, do you have a website or anywhere else you want to direct listeners?
Yeah,
If I'm a listener right now, I want to know everything about you.
thanks. Well, purposeful.io kind of puts you right into a world of purpose and this purposeful application. If that's something you're interested in, you can get my books pretty easily, I think, through Amazon or some bookstores. Uh, you can think about those alternatives. If you go to coursera.org is a place you can take a course that I taught in about purpose. Uh, so those are all places you might want to learn more about me, about how I speak about purpose.
Dr. Vic Strecher, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can't wait to follow you, track you, and get all your stuff.
It's a lot of fun, Andy. Thank you. You ask great questions.
Hey, everyone. Quick 10-second ask from you. If you're digging the show and you're watching on YouTube, please give it a thumbs up and comment your favorite part. If you're listening on Spotify, please give this show a 5-star rating. On iTunes, please leave a quick review. If you're listening on Substack, please subscribe and join the comments. You may want to subscribe in a few different places. For example, YouTube, you get all of our short content, 60-second to 90-second clips, our segments where we segment out 1 to 6 minute different segments of each episode. And then if you subscribe on the Substack, I summarize the episode in a newsletter. You can read it in a couple minutes. And then a couple days after the episode, I put out a self-reflection guide to help you personalize the content to your life. Thank you so much for supporting the show. Please share it with a friend.